I'd like to introduce you to Ben McCallum of the Edinburgh and Lothians Greenspace Trust, who so kindly agreed to give a seminar this evening on how to enhance Scottish green spaces and what we can do as individuals to better our local ecosystems. The Edinburgh and Lothians Greenspace Trust is a charitable endeavor. If you'd like to learn more about them, you can follow the link that I'll put in the chat in a second. And if you have any questions during Ben's seminar, please put them in the chat and I can just interrupt him and ask him those questions. But if you want to ask them yourselves, please just wait until the Q&A at the end, and he's happy to just answer anything or chat or share any resources if you have any questions. So without any further ado, here is Ben.
Thank you, Ruby. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me along today. What I'm just going to do is bring up the presentation. So, as Ruby mentioned, my name is Ben McCallum, and I work for the Edinburgh and Lothians Greenspace Trust, and I'm the Craigmillar Woodland Engagement Officer. So, the main topic of tonight's presentation will be all about enhancing your local green space. So, whether that be at home, in your garden, or further afield. But I also just wanted to give a little bit of background history to ELGT and a little bit about the project that I'm currently managing, because I think it demonstrates a lot of the work that we do and what we're trying to achieve, and also talk a little bit more about the benefits of green space. And as I'm sure all of you know, there are many. So just to start things off, ELGT. So really, in a nutshell, our mission is to provide everyone in Edinburgh and the Lothians with access to quality green spaces, which can help improve their health and well-being. So really, that's us in a nutshell. It's about improving green spaces, not only for wildlife and ecosystems, but really at the heart of that, it's communities and getting local communities involved in their local green spaces. And more of a focus on that is really with hard to reach communities, so communities living in social deprivation that wouldn't normally choose to access green space. So we're a small independent charity. We're made up of a team of around 10, although we are, even under the current climate, still expanding and looking to recruit a couple more members of staff. And really what we're dedicated to doing is improving the quality of life for Edinburgh's and Lothians communities and reconnecting people with their local green spaces. And we firmly believe that, quality local green spaces impact on the health and well-being of individuals. We're also part of the Edinburgh Living Landscape Initiative, which I can talk a little bit more towards the end, but it's a really exciting network, really, that is partnered up with people like Scottish Wildlife Trust, Nature Scots, RSPB, and it's about creating, a city that's vibrant for wildlife and communities. So the sort of work that we do, well, we first operated under the ELGT umbrella in 1991, really to improve green spaces for the benefit of people through practical, environmental and educational projects. So, that really is about infrastructure improvements. So that can be play parks, school grounds, cycle paths, new parks, and also educational engagement projects. And all these projects are designed to benefit people and wildlife, landscape and heritage, and help connect people with the natural environment. The project that I'm currently managing is based in Craigmillar, Craigmillar Castle Park. And a little bit of background, that Craigmillar is an area in high social deprivation within Edinburgh. It falls within the top 5% of the country. All that being said, there's this absolutely fantastic park sort of right in the middle of the estate, with a fantastic castle, fantastic path network, and some fantastic woodlands. And the work that we do is all about trying to connect with as many people as we can through a range of different projects to get them outside. So a couple of examples of this would be the Craigmillar Walking Group that we set up at the start of the project back in 1997. And really interesting that with this particular project, I had sort of prepared all this interpretive material and all this sort of educational type work as part of the walking group, and it really turned out to be a social group. We found that by walking through green space and walking through the woods and the park, people really relaxed and they opened up, and it was a real social group, for those feeling maybe isolated and disconnected from their community. And really successful. We have people from all walks of life on it. We have people with additional support needs, elderly, younger people, and it's a really lovely group. We also do lots of practical conservation volunteering groups in the park. One of those would be the upskilling project. So that's working in partnership with New Battle Abbey College and also Action for Children. So it's a 12-week program that we run with young people aged between 15 and 21. So these young people are, deemed as vulnerable. They're maybe disengaged with school, being expelled from school, and finding it difficult to find sustainable employment. So we do a whole range of green space management projects in the park, and it's really about building up their skills and confidence to help them find future work. As you can imagine, it's quite a difficult, challenging group, but to see the progression that these young people make and the evolution that they make over the 12-week program is quite incredible. We also do lots of work with schools. So there's 3 main primary schools in Craigmillar, and we work with all 3 of them. We do conservation activities, we do junior ranger programs, we do a whole host of different programs trying to get that grassroots early interest into green space. Community events is another element of the project. Obviously, that being on hold at the moment, but we do a range of different things, from small scale project events that I would run myself to looking at sort of bigger projects where we get external providers to deliver real showstopper type events. And it's really about trying to attract people that wouldn't normally go to a park or a woodland, and actually saying, look, this is a really fun place to be. It's a great place to bring the family or friends or whatnot. So
We
that's
have a
really.
question already. Do you mind
Oh,
if I
yes,
interrupt?
please.
Leslie has asked, how does this equate with the building on greenfield sites that seem to be happening in the Lothians?
That's a really good question, actually. And as a sort of offshoot of that, I was speaking to Ruby before everyone came into the waiting room. So parks in Edinburgh, most of them come under council jurisdiction, part of their natural heritage parks. So those parks are exempt from any sort of planning permission or planning proposals. There are, however, areas within Edinburgh that don't quite have that same jurisdiction over them. Little France Park, which is Edinburgh's newest park, which borders Craigmillar Castle Park, is a really good example of that. There's been lots of new planning developments already, but there's large parts of it fall under council land. So we've been working really hard in partnership with other organisations to develop the park and creating cycleways, actual travel routes, tree planting events, a whole range of different things, really to try and take it off the planning proposal map. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on, but it is a very tricky issue at the moment, and it's something that we really work towards, because under our whole ethos that communities, are entitled to good green space. So, by that measure, these new developments should encompass some type of green space locally to them. So, benefits of green space. I could talk all evening about this, but I'll cover some of the main points, and really the topics and the benefits that the ELGT focus on. So health and well-being is probably at the forefront of that, particularly when it comes to improving our mental well-being. So it's been proven that spending time in green spaces decreases stress levels and has positive impacts on blood pressure. So people that are maybe feeling anxious or stressed, going out into green spaces can help relieve that. And we do a lot of work with medical centres and community link workers, and the real buzzword at the moment is green subscribing. So it's, you know, not taking medication, it's actually getting people outside to deal with any poor mental health. And of course, you know, green spaces encourage physical activity, you know, by offering pleasant places for people to walk and cycle. It really encourages people to get out there and be more active. And it's estimated that only 1/3 of people in the UK actually achieve the recommended level of exercise per day. And they also promote greater levels of social activity and stronger neighbourhood relationships. So again, by having a pleasant place to relax and spend time, you know, play parks being a really good example of that, where, you know, different people from different households all in the same place, developing those relationships. Wildlife and habitats. So I think this is a really crucial one, particularly at the moment. You know, when you look at the loss of habitat that we've seen, not just in urban areas, but also wilder places as well. For example, you know, we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since the 1930s. You know, 97%, that's a huge amount of really crucial habitat. So urban green spaces, you know, they provide a really important habitat for wildlife and increase urban biodiversity. And obviously larger parks and woodlands support, you know, the widest range of species and whatnot, but even small areas can support a whole host of different plants, insects and birds, whether that be your garden, pocket parks, things like that. And a really sort of quite new idea at the moment is wildlife corridors. So the idea behind that is linking parks and providing areas for wildlife to move freely between different areas within an urban woodland setting. And as an example of that, a project that we're working in at the moment with the Butterfly Conservation Trust and the City of Edinburgh Council is butterfly planters. So we've put in a number of square metre planters, timber planters, right the way through Little France Park and Craigmillar Castle Park, that connects a really important species of butterfly called the northern brown argus. So it's going to create habitat for those species of butterfly to move freely over an area of around 3 miles. So it's a really exciting project, and you know, something we're really excited to get going. And of course, you know, other benefits, and particularly relevant with this group, with temperature and climate change. So with trees and plants taking in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, of course, the more mass of trees and plants that we have, the more CO2 is going to be absorbed from our atmosphere. Also things like air quality. Particles and gases are a real issue, and poor air quality are a real issue in urban spaces. And particles can stick to the surface of leaves, and gases are taking through the pores in leaf surfaces. So the more biomass of plants and trees that we have help increase that air quality that's really important, you know, particularly in urban spaces. So moving on to the main topic of the presentation, and how we, you know, as individuals can enhance our green space, starting at the home, which, you know, might seem like a bit of an unusual place to begin with, but I think with the whole current global pandemic, I think, you know, being at home and improving green spaces at home has never been more important, and connecting people through green spaces at home in particular. And there's a number of things that you can do. One of the most effective and fun ideas is window boxes. So, you know, a lot of people have herb boxes, you know, growing their own herbs, oregano, thyme, chives, things like that. If you wanted to take that to another level, You could actually encourage butterflies and other pollinator species such as bumblebees, hoverflies, and moths by planting a pollinator specific planter. And the good news is that many of these species are actually attracted to common household herbs. So oregano in particular is a really important herb that attracts a whole host of different butterfly species. You can also plant things like thyme, chives, mint. So not only getting the benefit of fresh herbs, but you're actually providing a mini habitat for really important pollinator species. I have a list of suggested species. So if anyone was interested in actually planting a window box, I do have quite a comprehensive list of recommended species. So if anyone was interested, please feel free to email Ruby and I can pass that on rather than maybe just listing things now, because it can be a little bit dry when you're talking about Latin names and things like that. But yeah, window boxes, you know, they're a great idea to do at home. Bird feeders are another really, really good thing to do, and they're a really good activity to do, particularly with young children. We had a program over the summer working with families over Zoom. We set them a challenge of making a homemade bird feeder, the one that you can see on the right of the screen, which is actually, all it is recycled loo roll, or the tube, I should say, with peanut butter and wild bird seed. And you hang it on your window, and every day you try and identify a different bird species. And it was incredible the amount of different birds that were attracted to these bird feeders. If you didn't want to have a go at making your own one, you can buy pre-bought ones. RSPB have a whole range of different ones on their site. The one thing I would say, so the one you can see on the left here, it's actually got a sort of a sucker that you put onto the window. If you've got a really large window that doesn't have curtains and it doesn't have window panes, the danger with these ones are that birds can actually fly into the window, which is obviously something we're trying to avoid. So I would only really suggest using these if you have, you know, a light curtain or something that breaks up the window that the birds can see, and it sort of discourages them from flying into the window. That's why the ones that you actually hang, like the one on the right there, are really effective. The seed that we would use is just a wildflower seed that you can buy in most supermarkets. You can buy a kilo bag for about £3, so they're quite cost effective. And you stick the seed with peanut butter. One tip, if you do use peanut butter, use the no sugar variety. If you use too high a sugar content, it can actually have a bit of an adverse effect on the birds. So not a low sugar or zero sugar peanut butter with bird seed is all you need. And particularly in the autumn time. So at this time when the birds are on migration, you'll probably see that now if you have a garden or if you're on local walks, you'll see birds on mass movement. So providing, you know, extra energy for them for their long journey is really a good thing to do. So wormeries and bug hotels. So wormeries probably not for the squeamish. A great thing for young boys and girls to do. I had a group that we did a wormery with, and really fascinating home science projects. You know, they really teach us a lot about the natural world, and it can all be done, you know, at home. So a wormery, really simple idea. You could use, you know, a jam jar, or, you know, a sweetie jar, any sort of large plastic container really, and you just fill it in layers. So you'd have gravel at the bottom, then another layer of soil, another layer of sand, soil, sand, soil. So you're creating a layer effect, and then of course some fresh leaves or some, you know, fresh vegetation, you know, that breaks down and, you know, the worms can actually eat. And over a period of time, when you've had the worms in for a while, you'll actually see the worm tracks, you know, the worm holes throughout the whole jar. So it's a really quite a fascinating project to do at home. And then bug hotels are another one you can do. You can buy shot bought type constructions are quite elaborate. They're almost like bug palaces, or you can make really simple ones yourself. And all you would do is, you could have any type of hollow wooden structure that's quite robust, and you fill it with hollow bamboo tubes, mosses, acorns, pine cones, anything that provides cover and habitat. And then these are another really good thing to put out into the garden. So again, enhancing your green space in the garden is probably, you could, if you're lucky enough to have a garden or access to a garden, this is where you can really make a benefit in urban wildlife and habitats. The options are almost limitless, and it's really just as far as your imagination will take you and how you want to develop that. Plants are, and planting is probably one of the easiest and also one of the most effective ways to attract a whole range of different wildlife into your garden, particularly when it comes to pollinator species, so bees and butterflies, things like that. And as I mentioned before, with losing 97%, of our wildflower meadows, every little bit helps. Even if it's a tiny little area, if you can plant things that benefit these insects, it's going a long way. So a couple of tips really to get the best out of your planting. Grow lots of nectar rich flowers, flowers that produce lots of nectar, produce lots of food. And again, I can provide a really comprehensive list of those types of flowers. The best time is for flowers to be really available to the insects between March and November. That these are when these insects are most active and widespread. So providing food at these times is really beneficial. Excuse me. So, choose a variety of different plants. The more variety you have, the better. It will attract a much greater diversity of species. Climbing plants are a great thing to do. So, flowers and plants that produce nectar provide the food. But if you can have climbing plants that go up walls and fences and things like that, it actually provides shelter. And that's arguably even more beneficial because there's so little structure there normally for things like butterflies and bees to shelter from an adverse weather, that by having climbing plants, you're providing habitat, you're providing structure for them. If you didn't want to do any planting or growing or things like that, just let an area of grass grow long. That's a really good way to actually encourage more wildlife into your garden. And I know that particularly in Edinburgh Council at the moment, they've got a relaxed mowing policy, which lots of people were up in arms about, saying that, they're not cutting the grass and anything like that. But the actual benefit of that, of leaving these long areas to grow naturally, was twofold, in encouraging biodiversity. Of course, not using insecticides and pesticides where possible is definitely recommended. They do have an adverse effect on native insects. So if you can, and if you can bear it, try and hold off on the insecticides. So a couple of examples of different plants that you could grow. Buddleia is a really good one. Be careful with Buddleia. They're quite they grow like wildfire, and if you're not careful, they can really overtake and dominate an area. So Buddleia does take quite well to being grown in large planters or containers. So that's one way that you can make sure it doesn't spread to other areas of the garden, or more importantly, into other people's gardens. But their nickname's the butterfly bush. And if I'm sure you'll have walked past the Buddleia in the summertime, and it's just covered in insects. They're a real magnet. Lavender is a great one. Perennial wallflower, and honeysuckle. So honeysuckle again is a climbing plant. So a good one to plant next to a wall or a fence or something like that. And they smell fantastic. They give off this really pungent aromatic smell, quite heady smell actually in the summer. So that's another great one to plant. If you've got the space, then planting a tree, great thing to do. We always encourage people to plant native species. Our wildlife has obviously evolved with these native species in mind. So things like rowan and birch are two really good species to plant in a tree. They don't, in a garden, sorry, they don't grow too large, so they're quite manageable, and they provide huge opportunities for insects and birds and things like that. For birds to shelter, to perch, to roost, and provide a food source. So all the insects that the tree harbors is, again, a food source for these birds. And if you were inspired and you decided to make a bird box, they make a great place to hang it as well. You've, again, been careful. You wouldn't want to plant it too close to the house. Some of these tree species have really deep root systems. So, things like willow in particular, if their root system is under the house, it can have a real impact on the foundations and cause a lot of hassle, down the line. So, always, 10 meters is probably a good distance to have from the house. And actually, a lot of insurance places as well, they actually ask that question, is do you have any large trees close to a house? And 10 meters is usually the sort of accepted distance. If you didn't have 10 meters and you didn't have the space to grow a larger tree, a smaller fruit tree is a great thing to do. Really, when things are starting to come into fruit, in the autumn time is exactly when local bird populations are looking for for more food and higher energy food. So plum trees and cherry trees, things like that, a great thing to do for the local bird population. Providing shelter. This is one that probably, looking at gardens, is probably one that gets overlooked a lot, but it's really important, and it's a really easy thing to do. So, providing nest box, you can invite birds into your garden, is probably the most common one, but there's a whole range of specific shelters that you can either buy or build. And some examples of them are bats. So they look very similar to bird boxes, and quite often, if you're in a woodland, you could easily mistake bat boxes for bird boxes for bat boxes. They are slightly different in their design. They've usually got a much narrower entrance, which is at the bottom of the actual structure to allow them to crawl into it, rather than your classic circle that the birds go into in the middle. You can get shelters for bees, for hedgehogs, frogs, toads, and insects. So a real variety of different things. And, as I said, there's lots of instructional videos and websites that you can even have a go at making your own. And we have some fact sheets as well. So if anyone wanted to have a shot at building their own, let Ruby know, and I'd be happy to pass on that information. Probably the most adventurous, creating your own pond, not for the faint-hearted. I've been involved in lots of failed pond projects in my time, people phoning us and asking for advice, and they had the best intentions, but it hasn't worked out. But, having a pond just opens up so many doors for a whole host of different wildlife that you just wouldn't normally see in your urban garden. Particularly things like frogs and newts, toads and dragonflies. So a couple of tips with making ponds. Having a sloping edge is a really good thing to do. Quite often you'll see a pond that's basically just unilaterally sort of deep all the way around. But if you do create a bit of a slope or a bit of an angle, it encourages birds and mammals to actually drink from the water. So again, you're sort of enhancing that habitat, and you're making it more friendly to a wider range of different animals. A log pile is a really good way to do that. So you just have different size of logs, and you just create it so it slopes into the pond at a bit of an angle. And of course, always remember to use a good quality lining. So once you've dug your main sort of hole, line that with a really good durable structure that isn't going to leak or tear down the line. Because one day, you might wake up and your entire pond is drained, and all this wildlife and all this aquatic vegetation that you've acquired over months or years is gone. So that's another good tip. But if space is limited and you don't fancy going all out and building a big pond, even a small bird bath, something like that, is a great thing for birds. And you could even make one yourself using a shallow container. So it doesn't have to be expensive or shop bought. You can really easily make something yourself. So garden recycling. The ancient art of compost. So this is something that is great fun to do at home. Lots and lots of benefits. It's a real skill and art form to get good compost, and lots of old gardeners I know, they don't give up their secrets too easily. You have to prize it out of them, but there's a couple of fail-safe ways to do it. The most important thing is actually filling your compost with the right material. So if you start off with your compost bin, and the first thing to do is actually line it with sticks or woody material, and that allows ventilation and air to sort of fall through the middle. And what you're trying to achieve is a layered system. So you'd have layers of veg waste and household waste that isn't meat or anything like that. And then you could have garden waste, so grass trimmings, young weeds, and then you could even layer it with newspapers and egg cartons, things like that. And the more diversity and the more variety of material that you have, the greater quality of compost you'll have at the end. Make sure it's nice and moist. You don't want anything that's too dry, and cover it. And periodically, you're stirring it, you're trying to churn it up, and adding more material to it. And a lot of the compost bins that you buy now actually have a door at the bottom, so it helps you monitor the progress of the compost. And what you're really looking for at the end, and it takes about 6 months to a year as a minimum, is a sort of really nice light brown crumbly material. And it's just a great fertilizer, and it's a great food source for your plants. So going back to what we're talking about with planting wildlife friendly species in your garden, avoiding using shop bought chemical pesticides and insecticides. By creating your own composts, you've got this beautiful material that is just so beneficial to your plants, but is also much more sort of eco-friendly as well. And again, I've got a really good fact sheet that just sort of details all the steps and processes that you need to do to get good compost. So if anyone again is interested, let Ruby know, and I can pass that on. And then just a couple of things that are quite fun to do if you're so inclined. Like the photo demonstrates, old shoes and boots. They're a great thing to plant, to use as planters. They add a lot of character to your garden. Other things you can use, yogurt tubs are great for starting seedlings. They're just the right size. As long, put a couple of holes in the bottom so the soil drains out, but a great thing to do. Same with egg cartons. They're a great container to get seedlings started. If you have any old tires, tires are one of the real issues we have with, with going onto landfill and fly tipping and things like that. They're a really difficult product to recycle and use, effectively. But if you have, even if you're a car tire, if you need your new tires, ask the mechanic or the garage to save your tires, put them in the garden, fill them with soil, and they make a great planter, you know, really, really effective. And a whole host of different things you can do as well to recycle. So if you don't have a local park, a local garden, or you are interested in improving your local green space further afield, your park or your woodland, great places to start. And it's something that we really encourage people to get involved in. They're a great way, you know, if by volunteering and joining friends of groups, you know, they're a great way to meet like-minded people. They are really good social groups normally, and you just have the opportunity to do really valuable, meaningful conservation work. And you know, particularly now with, you know, local authorities being stretched in terms of budget and things like that, you know, I know from firsthand experience that actually working with volunteer groups, sometimes it's the only way to get these jobs done. And if we didn't have engaged, active groups, it just wouldn't happen. So, you know, the photo here is a bee bank that we built with a group of volunteers. And if I was out in the park doing this myself, you know, it'd take me a week to do it. And we did this in an afternoon. We had a laugh and a bit of a chat, cup of tea halfway through. And, you know, as a day's work, we've created this fantastic bee bank. If you're interested in getting involved in volunteering, then it's always worthwhile getting in touch with your local authority first. If you're unsure who actually owns the land, the local authority should be able to tell you. And if they don't own it, they'll certainly be able to point you in the right direction of who does. And quite often there'll be an organisation like ourselves who facilitate volunteering groups out there. Quite often now, lots of parks are friends of groups, and you know, they're almost a sort of self-managing group who work with local authorities and other bodies and actually do the work that needs to be done. And again, really social groups, really great fun to be involved in. And then other ways you can support is supporting local and national charities. So, you know, joining newsletters, mailing lists, donating, whole range of different things which enable, you know, local charities to sort of continue their work. So a whole range of different things. And if anyone's interested or would like more information, there's just so much information out there now. There's so many different organizations and charities doing such fantastic work, and they're just a click away. You know, they're just, you know, type into Google and you'll you know, particularly within your local area, and a whole host of different stuff will come up. Facebook in particular, if you're on Facebook, is a great resource for finding out what's happening in your local area. But these are just some of the environmental and organizations that we work with or would suggest you turn to. They all have websites, and they're all very active, doing really, really important work when it comes to green spaces and engaging local communities. And again, you know, I could probably provide, you know, 3 pages of websites. So again, if anyone is interested, just let Ruby know and I'll pass that information on. And of course, this slideshow would also be available. So if there's any information that people want from the slideshow, and you can go back on it at your own time as well. So thank you very much for your time and listening to me. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ben. That was really comprehensive. Fiona Brody shared something in the chat that's not a question, but it did put a smile on my face, that she has an old toilet that's being used as a cistern lid, and it has a good bird bath in it.
Oh, brilliant.
I guess if anyone has an old toilet, I just like the imagery of it. It's quite cool.
If there was an image that they would be happy to share, I'd be very interested, because I could maybe include that in another presentation at some point, because I've never heard of that before. So it's a really good idea.
It's actually, you know, it's the old toilet itself on its pedestal, which is great because it gives height. So we've got variegated ivy growing out of it, and I put pots in with flowers in the middle of it in the summer.
Oh, brilliant.
And we turned the cistern lid upside down and use it as a bird bath. So there you go.
Great idea.
Thank you.
I think Alice raised her hand. If we can just unmute. There we go.
Ben, we'd love to put out bird feed, but we have a problem with the squirrels.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you a solution?
Unfortunately not. You can get some feeders that are supposedly squirrel proof. I don't have any first-hand experience of those though, because as you probably well know, you know, they can be quite determined and very intelligent, and they always seem to find a way through. So, as I said, I have seen some online, but I haven't had first-hand experience to recommend them, so I wouldn't want to recommend them in case they didn't work. But it is an issue, and it's very difficult to try and gain access for the birds, but not the squirrels. One idea though that you could try is it's a smaller idea, but if you were to get a pine cone, and if you dip the pine cone again in lard or sugar-free peanut butter, and you dip that into the bird seeds, you know, you'll have a cone covered seed. And if you had a piece of string and you hang those from the trees, I think the squirrels wouldn't be able to climb down the string because it's too flimsy. So, but it would still allow the birds to access it. You could also try that with, if you didn't have access to pine cones, you could try it with yogurt tubes. Same idea, you drill a hole in the bottom, you attach your string through and tie a knot so it's connected. You fill the yogurt pot again with lard or peanut butter or any type of product that's suitable for birds, and you hang that up. And then I think that would stop the squirrels actually climbing down the string to get into the bird feed. So that could be worth a try.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Leslie did have a good note not to plant food in tires because there might be chemicals, so just plants.
Definitely, that's a really good point. So absolutely. So just again, plants for butterflies or things that aren't going to be consumed, because that's exactly right. They can leach out, you know, unwanted chemicals and things like that. That goes for the same, you know, for planting vegetable planters and things like that. You know, just being careful where what timber you use. You know. Sleepers, you know, old railway sleepers are a really good example of that. But I can't, I'm on the spot now, so I've completely forgotten the name of the chemical that was used to preserve them. Again, that can leach out. So using, you know, an untreated wood that then you can treat yourself, that you know exactly what's in that timber, is as a safe way to actually grow your fruit and vegetables and things like that.
If anyone has any more questions, please just raise your hands or put them in the chat. But if there aren't, I'm happy to ask just a list of questions that I put together. So you spoke at the beginning about infrastructure improvements on public lands, and I wanted to know, what is the biggest obstacle for making something like that happen? Is it working with a local authority? Is it like, how do you navigate an improvement on public space?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that funding actually is one of the big barriers. It's actually getting funding in the first place to develop these projects. You know, all these projects are usually funding dependent. If you have a local authority that's engaged, I mean, I'm incredibly lucky where I am in Edinburgh, and the Natural Heritage Service that we have, they're fantastic. So actually working with the local authorities is really good. You know, they bring lots of ideas to the table and are usually very accommodating. So funding and permission from the landowner. So if it isn't council owned and it's a private piece of land or it's another organization's land, actually getting permission in the first place can be quite difficult. And then of course, public approval. So all these projects have to go out to public consultation. And, you know, if there's a real you know, if there is a real will from the community not to have a particular project, you know, installed, then that can obviously create major issues because we couldn't go ahead with something without public approval. So I would say those are probably the three main things. And then of course, once infrastructure has been put in, then antisocial behaviour and destruction is another issue. Funding and maintenance upkeep is a real problem, that when you get funding for a piece of work, so whether that be maybe an outdoor sculpture or some tree planting, anything that needs ongoing maintenance, if there's not a strategy in place or money in place for long-term management, then they can fall by the wayside and fall into disrepair, and that can be a real issue.
So on a more positive note, I guess what's been your favorite part of your project at Craigmillar Castle, like on the flip side?
So many. I think I would say 80% of the community I work with would never normally choose to spend time in a park or a woodland. You know, when I first started, I was quite naive. I worked in other parts of Edinburgh where there was already a really engaged community. And so when I would do the first few events in Craigmillar, I had literally no one turn up to my events. I was just standing there on my lonesome. And, you know, it's taken a long time to sort of build up that momentum, build up that trust, probably more importantly in the community, that now we're in a position where, you know, our events, we could have, you know, 500, 600, 700 people along. So to see that project from start to finish and build the momentum and see the impacts it has on people and the benefits, and, you know, people's feedback, you know, saying how appreciative and how it's helped them and benefited them, you know, it really makes it worthwhile, and, you know, just spurs you on to do even bigger and better things.
Thank you. I think Fiona raised her hand, so we'll just ask her to mute.
No, I just wondered if you knew North Edinburgh Arts Centre.
Yeah, I've not worked with them personally. I'm really aware of the work that they do. It's sort of a little bit out with the sort of the Craigmillar area, so I haven't worked with them directly.
It's in your house, yeah.
Yeah, because it's in a very deprived area. My daughter actually created the garden there and now
really?
manages some of the projects. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
But it's they started with not much engagement, but they're very busy now, and they've got so many different projects and so many people and families come and use the space. It's wonderful.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think yeah, it's exactly that, you know, that initial idea of getting people along, just thinking, oh, you know, why would I want to go to a garden or a park? You know, what's the benefit of that? But then actually, when you and particularly now with this whole global pandemic, you know, I think now is taught us more than ever the importance of green space and what that means to people. And, you know, I was working from home during the whole period, really. I've only just started to work with groups again over the last few weeks. And, you know, I hadn't been to the park in one point in 4 months. So I went to the park and expected it to be a complete mess with litter everywhere, and, you know, but it wasn't. I've never seen the park cleaner. And what we discovered, there was a group of local residents, you know, a handful of local residents who had taken it upon themselves to form a little task force and actually do litter picks to keep the park tidy.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
during this lockdown, green space and parks and just being able to relax and unwind was just so important, you know, and I think we're really seeing that, you know, the appreciation of parks now.
Yeah. Well, they'd obviously bought into feeling that, you know, it was theirs, you know.
And that ownership, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I was going to ask was, do you do anything about food growing at Craigmillar? Or you've talked a lot about wildlife, but I know certainly at the North Edinburgh Arts Centre, you know, they encourage food growing, and that link between you know, food just doesn't turn up in packets in the supermarket, and growing your own food is very satisfying, but it's also a great connection to the natural world.
Absolutely. So with Within Craigmillar, there's so many different organisations, and we work in partnership with a lot of those different people. And there's one project called Craigmillar Community Grows.
Right.
And
Yeah, I've heard of it.
they're really sort of focused on community gardens and growing food. So we work a lot with them in partnership, but just not to step on anyone's toes, I sort of leave the growing to them and the sort of the woodland and the wildlife, and we sort of cross paths and we work with the same people, and it's exactly as you said, it's creating that link. The one element of food that I do get involved in is foraging. So so I really love to take people out and show them what food's available on your doorstep for free. And those are some of the most successful events. It's incredible. People are just blown away that you can walk 10 meters and already you've identified 6 or 8 different species that you can use. And it's all free and it's all healthy and it's all right there to be gathered. So that's something I'm really interested in.
Yeah, me too. I love foraging.
Oh, brilliant.
I believe that everybody doesn't go out and pick their own free food. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Very satisfying.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm jaggy.
Yeah, I came across a thicket of blackthorn for sloes a couple of weeks ago. For some sloe gin, I have to say, and I came back absolutely scratched to pieces afterwards. But I'm sure in 3 months' time it'll be worth the pain.
I make her come along and pick rose hips and brambles with me.
Lovely.
Well, I'm not sure he thinks it is, but he enjoys the fruits of it.
I was going to say, I don't think I would trust myself to know what to pick and what not to pick. So maybe we'll program that next. So
Well, you actually find somebody who can lead you. I mean, they're quite all over the country. There are people who lead foraging walks. I did one in local Pollock Park in Glasgow. And you get coastal walks where you can, find out what to forage on the beach and the seashore as well.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Yeah, because I live in Musselburgh, so we're just on the water, so I'd probably opt for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, there's a woman called Anna Canning from Flora Medica, and she is just an encyclopedia when it comes to foraging. She is incredible. So if anyone was interested, and I would get in touch with Anna, and again I can pass on her website if anyone was interested.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions, unless anyone wants to pop in just quick. But I would ask everyone to unmute quickly so that we can give Ben a round of applause for his great seminar. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our second ever Climate Network event. So please have a look out. We'll have our next event hopefully in December, but if you'd like to have a say in it, again, please just email me and you can have your voice heard. And thank you again so much for spending your Thursday with us. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.